Buongiorno and welcome to the Author's Preface, a show that explores how authors and their stories are forged. My name's Sam Hale. Thanks for coming back. So, what's good with me? Hardly anything, just writing, podcasting, got a strong lineup coming your way. Recently joined a sort of online dating site, but for podcasters, and I've been swiped right like mad. It's flattering and overwhelming. So, suffice it to say, I will be quite busy editing over the next couple weeks. But the perk for you, dear listener, is that you will not want for guests, and it'll be a rather eclectic cavalcade of authors from across genres. Some I'm not as familiar with, but eager to talk to. $1 Patreon tier is available. Get all the goodies of the $3 at no extra charge. There's always a free tier you can sign up for as well. But if you decide you like what you see there, you like getting the sneak peeks at next guests or samples of my work, updates, all that good stuff, hey, $1 for a teacher and a writer, that's a king's ransom. I'd appreciate it. But otherwise, just checking out the show is payment enough. That's not entirely true. I really need your money. Anyway, before I get to today's guest, I'd like to put a shout out there to a friend of the show and guest as well, Terry Brown. She was on podcast number 6. Terry is a wonderful lady, a kindred spirit. She and I really enjoyed our conversation and the ones we've continued to have since then. She has a new book out. I'd like to make sure folks hear about it, called Daughters of Green Mountain Gap. Now, I'm not even going to try and summarize it. I haven't had the pleasure of reading it yet, so if you'll allow me, I'm just going to read from the Amazon description. Here we go. Maggie McCurry, a generational healer woman, relies on family traditions, folklore, and beliefs gleaned from a local Cherokee tribe. Her daughter, Carrie Ann, believes her university training holds the answers. As they clash over the use of roots, herbs, and a dash of mountain magic versus the medicine available in the town's apothecary, Josie May doesn't know whom to follow. But what happens when neither family traditions nor science can save the ones you love most? Daughters of Green Mountain Gap weaves a compelling tale of Maggie, Carrie Ann, and Josie May, 3 generations of remarkable North Carolina women living at the turn of the 20th century, shedding light on racism, fear of change, loss of traditions, and the intricate dynamics within a family. Author Terry M. Brown skillfully navigates the complexities of their lives, revealing that some questions are not as easy to answer as one might think. Haven't had the chance to read it, like I mentioned. I intend to. Terry's a wonderful writer. Terry's focus on the American experience throughout various generations from World War II up until this latest release are something I love to explore. A good slice of Americana. If you're not from the States and you're interested to hear about some of the more rural and rustic experiences of 18th, 19th, 20th century Americans, I think Terry Brown's a good place to start. So check that out. That's Daughters of Green Mountain Gap by Terry Brown. But who am I chatting with today? Today's guest is science fiction, fantasy, and dystopian author Stephen Healt. Stephen's most notable works are the Amboy series, which we discuss at length, as well as our mutual love of the band Coheed and Cambria concept albums, and some of the inspiration that went into the Amboy series, courtesy of the Amory Wars, a graphic novel series that follows the Coheed and Cambria discography, strong work, prog rock, what's not to like. Stephen has a bachelor's in geology. We get into that with the discussion on supervolcanoes and why you should be terrified. He has a master's in geoscience, grew up writing stories as a kid, drew comic books, fell out of writing only to get back into it. It's good to hear he has a genuine love of the craft. And we discuss at length art and the artist. Is the artist dead once it goes out into the world? What's the moral, ethical, and creative statute of limitations on art created by people with not so savory pasts? It's an interesting conversation, one I enjoyed having with Steve. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more about him, he's on Instagram at Steve Healt. Healt, by the way, is spelled Healt. He loves getting emails from fans, stephenhealt@gmail.com. And he has a tentative Q3 release in 2024 this year for the next book in the Amboy series. Check it out, as well as all the goodies leading up to it. Aside from what I just mentioned, we talk about quite a few things such as exoplanets, the ethics of podcasting, especially with more notable names, like I mentioned, supervolcanoes, and some other good stuff there. Oh, and Warhammer 40K. There is a timestamp to skip that portion, though I don't know why you'd want to do that. Anyway, a lot of good stuff here with Stephen. I'd like to get right into it. So, without further delay, I bring you Stephen Healt's preface. And I'm here with Stephen Healt. Stephen, how you doing, man?
Doing good. Thanks for having me, Sam.
Of course, it's my pleasure. You and I were chatting prior to me hitting that big red record button. We've got a ton of stuff in common outside of writing. I want to grill you on it. But before we even get to that, let's talk about your background, genres, all that good stuff. Give people a breakdown of who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Steve Healt. As far as education goes, I've got a few degrees ranging from digital animation to geosciences. I kind of did little bit of everything. Current job, I'm working as a distillation chemist for a fragrance and flavor company. And then, yeah, when I'm not doing that, I write science fiction, fantasy, dystopia. People would recognize me for my Amboy series. It's right now 3 books are out with a novella. Quick way of describing it, it's like alien contact with Earth. Fast forward 200 years. What are those relationships like? What's the dynamic? That sort of thing.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that. There's some interesting dynamics at play in the world building itself. So we'll definitely get to all that. First, we will start with your preface. All right, so we start at the old world here. Prior to writing, Stephen, were you fulfilled in life? Did you feel like anything was missing? Where were you as a person prior to writing?
Yeah, so I was really just trying to figure out like what I wanted, like what was I doing? Back then it was like, okay, I need to get a job, make money, got to start settling down, put some roots down. But fulfilled? No, I don't think I was. Like I said, I have associates in digital animation. I really wanted to get into video games and things like that. I got that, worked on a few small projects. Nothing ever really went anywhere. So I had to get a quote real job. So I helped a buddy of mine manage his distribution business. It was essentially just like warehouse management. Did that for a few months, and then he had to let me go because I had no idea what I was doing. And then after that, went back to school, got a bachelor's in geology, master's in geoscience. But again, like I'm just kind of all over the place. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then I finished my master's. And I was like, okay, now I have time. I'd been thinking about a story for a long time. So I was like, it's 2019. So yeah, just finished my master's. Like, let's take this a little more seriously. So I just started writing a whole bunch. And in doing that, that sort of got me on the right track to like where I am now, like definitely satisfied with what I'm doing in my life and things like that.
I almost went into game design as well. So I'm kind of curious to hear from you. Why didn't you go through with it? Because for me, I noticed the market was getting inundated with untested potential talent. And I just knew I didn't have what it took to compete at the level with some of these people who nowadays I'm sure are producing some of the most seminal games we've seen in the last 10, 15 years. So was there a specific reason why you didn't follow through with game design?
Yeah, it's like you're saying, you look around and you see what everyone else is doing, and it's not that what I was doing was bad. It just wasn't at that level, and I knew I wasn't as interested and I wasn't as like devoted as the people who were putting out like high quality stuff, as they were. Me and my friend worked on the sort of like I would even say like the baby stages of an app. It was a two-dimensional sort of like guy running through an alley shooting guys with motorcycle helmets on. It was, pretty basic stuff. We never really went too far with it, but I think it was just yeah, it just wasn't where I think most people were as far as like devotion to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I think prior to about 2018 or so, I always moonlit as a writer, but was teaching full time and thought, I don't think I have the chops to stand toe to toe with not even people who are, New York Times bestsellers, but just in general, I didn't feel as though I had what it took. But I think, like you, I'm sure found out you got to start somewhere. And so I did. And over time, it did start to metastasize. We're going to use like almost negative action verb here. But going back, childhood always, for obvious reasons, is very formative. Were you writing at all as a child, even if it was just like my cat is annihilating my bedpost? That's not a scratching post. Sorry. When I was a kid, I was writing all kinds of stuff, but it was never too serious. What kinds of things were you dabbling in? Was writing as a child or even a teenager something you were participating?
Yeah, I think, I would always, like, play with action figures and tell myself stories that were going on, and then I always loved, like, creating creative writing things that, like, we would do in school. There was, I think it was in 4th grade, we had these blank notebooks, and we would do I think it was, like, once a week. From a bin, you'd pull sort of, like, the title of a story, and you had to write what that story was.
Oh, I
Um
love that.
yeah, it was really cool. I still have it actually. There was something I wanna do down the road is rewrite those stories as I would now as, like, short stories sort of thing. But one of them that sticks with me now is, like, it was just called "It's Dark Down Here." And, I drew, like, a car with, like, a big light taped to the roof, and it's just, like, a guy going in a tunnel. I don't remember. I think there was, like, a rat king or something. I don't remember exactly what it was about, but I really enjoyed doing that. And then end of elementary school, middle school, I was drawing my own comics. The first few were just basically Captain Underpants ripoffs,
Hmm.
and it sort of went from there. I did a lot of that stuff. I don't know where it's probably like lost to time, but I wrote like a superhero sort of book as well. But a lot of that was again like X-Men ripoffs. As this sort of early stuff is, it's like what are you into, and you're basically writing fan fiction. Is like what a lot of those things are.
At the higher education level, I've met people who ended up writing, say, hard sci-fi because they were in the STEM fields and were exposed to the idea that you could take hard sciences, quantitative data, and make that compelling in a way you didn't think was possible. Did you experience that? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, you have a degree in the geosciences. Was there a kind of awakening at all, or did you see a way to weaponize what you were learning at higher education?
Yeah, I think, it's kinda hard to take that out once it's in your brain, you know? So when I'm, map building or map making and stuff like that, I'm like, does this make sense geologically? Where are the tectonic plates, you know? So it's a good and bad thing because it really bogs you down, but at least to me, and maybe other people who can notice that stuff, they're like, "Oh, yeah, that does make sense,"
Mhm.
realistically, and it adds, like, that other layer of realism, I guess, to the world. And, yeah, I my master's program, the research I was doing was exoplanet discovery, so
No kidding.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So there's that whole layer of, like, other worlds and what are they like and how can they exist, what are the sort of the requirements for an Earth-like planet and things like that, so
so 2 parts to that. Exoplanets are potentially habitable planets. How do you go about finding it? Because I know across the board, there are different ways we use that. I think, like, one of them is the sort of spectrum, the color spectrum that's emitted helps us make determinations, but with what you're doing, how do we determine if we're looking at an exoplanet? And then I think this would be a nice way to also transition into the Amboy series. So, how do you go about discovering an exoplanet? And then, if it did, how did that make it into your stories?
Yeah, so what we were doing essentially, if you imagine like someone's holding a really bright light, on the other side of a field or something, and someone throws a tennis ball in front of that light, you can track the light that dissipates, and
Mm.
the amount that it dissipates is sort of it's been a little while, so I'm rusty. So someone out there could correct me if I'm wrong, but the amount that it dissipates gives you the size of the planet, and then the number of times that same sort of dissipation occurs gives you its like orbit and things like that. I used to know, but there is a way to tell if it has an atmosphere based on spectroscopy. But I might be totally wrong at this point. Like once I was done with that stuff, I totally like threw it out of my head. It just wasn't really what I was interested in anymore.
I know one of them was like looking at how it wobbles on its axial tilt. And you could make certain determinations about what's orbiting it and how people extrapolate from there. I have no idea, but that's a really interesting way of visualizing it,
Hmm.
throwing that tennis ball and kind of timing things. It's so simple yet elegant. And once you add the appropriate tech to it, then it just becomes downright science fiction. So let's
Yeah.
talk science fiction. Why sci-fi?
Yeah, that's a good question because when you look at the Envoy series, it's not just science fiction, there are fantasy elements as well. And I've always just enjoyed that like high tech, sort of aliens and spaceships. And I grew up watching Star Wars and stuff like that. So, as many people did, but I don't know if there's a why. I think it just, that's what I wanted to write, I guess. Yeah.
Hmm. Two parts. Are you a TNG or Deep Space Nine guy? And then let's talk about aliens. So let's start with your Star Trek interrogation.
Oh, did I say Star Trek? I totally meant Star Wars.
Did you might have. I always confuse it too. Did you watch Star Trek, by the way?
You know what? I will admit that I have not. It might get me crucified, but
Okay. Okay, we'll keep doing the show, but, yeah.
Deep Space Nine is on my, like, huge to-do list, though, I will say, because I keep hearing about it, so
It's pretty cool, the idea of having a static element in Star Trek where the crazy comes to them, as opposed to going out and intrepid explorations to get your world ruined on a weekly basis. So, while I was reading your book, there's a fair amount of othering occurring, specifically with humanity, which I found really interesting. It can be the boilerplate breakdown if you want. You can go as deep as you like. It's your art, and I don't want to defile it in any way. But why don't you tell us the basic premise? Because you've got this radial design for a specific part of the world. You have the other. There is an interesting dynamic going on between these various people. So why don't you just tell us about the Amboy series in terms of like premise and world building? And if you want to allude to, kind of your background in the sciences, if it even factors in or just in general, I think it'd be really interesting to talk about it.
yeah, yeah, so the sort of basic premise, our planet goes to shit. These aliens intervene and they save a small section of humanity. And then, like I had mentioned before, you fast forward 200 years, and what is that relationship like? So, the way they saved humanity was they created this shield that keeps this caustic fog essentially at bay. But they can only save a small portion of the planet. So, there's a sort of disparity between the people who are living on the outside of that area and the people who are living on the inside. And then even beneath the shield, there's disparity between the people who are the have and the have-nots, essentially. I've always been interested in the breakdown of, class structures and social structures and why people end up where they are and how they react to it. Do they like will they try and make their situation better, or do they just sort of think like, okay, this is it, this is where I've ended up in life, there's nothing you can sort of do about it. I don't know if that answers your question. Once I start talking, I kind of just go.
Yeah, welcome to the podcast, man. I put my foot in my mouth on a regular basis here. So, when we're looking at this dichotomy, and I don't want to go too deep into it because it's for the reader to enjoy, not for me to espouse here. But what I found interesting was just like you mentioned, there's this disparity, and I felt like and it could have just been me reaching, and the history nerd in me is always looking at correlations, even though they're not always causation here. But were you researching, say, something like communist societies, the Soviet Union, for example, to kind of look at how there is a sort of egalitarian esque aspect to your humans, at least, but in that they're all equally sort of oppressed in a way.
Yeah.
Were you, if that makes any sense, I don't think it did, but we'll find out in post. Were you looking at real world examples to inspire that setting?
Not intentionally. I think I've always been interested in history, so I've always been reading things, here and there. I didn't do any like, research for the book as far as, other government structures and collapses and things like that. But I have always been interested in when a group or a person gets power, how does that sort of ripple effect impact the people beneath them? Yeah, no, I didn't particularly do any research or anything like that, but I think it is just sort of subconsciously there. Yeah.
You say you don't do a whole lot of research. And again, if I'm putting words in your mouth, please correct me. But when you go about writing these books and just in general, how much, because you and I are both kind of from a STEM background, not kind of, we are from STEM backgrounds. Though it sounds like you and I diverge when you got your master's and what I got my master's in, which is education. I don't know. That might be STEM. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say it is. Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
It says what I know about education if I didn't know education was a STEM.
I don't know anything, so it's all good.
That's the wisest thing most people can say. Intelligence is knowing the difference between if a tomato is a fruit or vegetable. Wisdom is knowing if it goes well in a salad.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you write these sorts of books, how much do you outline and how much do you discover? Is there a Venn diagram there? In other words, do you go in blind or do you have a somewhat rigorous idea of beats and where you want this thing to be from the beginning to the end of the story?
I think, in the beginning, it was sort of like, "Here's a cool idea, I'm just gonna write about it," and I had no idea what was going like, what was going on, and that early stuff has just become a trunk novel. It's no one's ever gonna see it. It's terrible.
Shrunk novel. I like that.
It's, I sort of I'll go back to it and hint at it, here and there, like in, the 3rd book, Amid the Maelstrom, there are bits from that trunk novel that show up, but as far as that story itself, you're never gonna see it. But as I've sort of continued writing and I've learned a lot, I've learned so much in the past, what is it, 4 years now? I do plan a lot more because I'm sort of like, okay, I don't have as much free time as I used to, so when I have writing time, I need to be like, "Okay, what am I doing today? And can I get to like this sort of goal that I have set in my mind for the day?" So now it's sort of like, write what's going on in this chapter and then what's the goal and like what's the end. That's sort of like chapter to chapter. But as far as like looking at a book itself, looking at like where the characters are now and where they end up. And then the sort of in between I'll figure out as I'm going. So it is a little mix of, plotting and pantsing. But I think pantsers are just long, like how am I trying to say this? Like they're the long-term plotter, right? Like they're
Yeah.
pantsing a novel. That's just a really long outline. I think I was listening to a podcast recently and someone said that, and I was like, yes, that's exactly it.
I'm not saying it was me, but I had the same conversation with, I think it was Ryan Cahill, where
Maybe that's what it was, honestly. It probably was it.
yeah, I mean, the idea of pantsing and outlining, also just the binary aspects, people seem, it's like with hard and soft magic systems. It's you got to be
Mm.
one or the other. No, it exists on a spectrum, dingus.
Yeah.
And then outlining and discovery writing, oh, it's got to be one or the other. Where it's on a spectrum.
Mhm.
You want to be a hybrid. In my opinion, you want to be a hybrid. You want to be great at both of those so that you don't have any deficits, and you want to know how to balance them effectively so you can have fun writing. But yeah, I always thought of it as like, okay, what's an outliner? Somebody who's as they're going just has these general ideas. They can get super granular if they want, but they know where they want to be, but fully recognize that in between the beats is chaos and they can't wait to sift through it. What's a pantser? Somebody who has a general idea of where they start and where they want to end, and how they get there is half the fun. I think one definitely has more of this in it than the other, but I certainly, like you're saying, I totally see they're cousins. I
Mhm.
don't think they're enemies. They're not the Hetfields and McCoys. They're just cousins. I think the Hetfields and McCoys were cousins too,
It
actually.
might have been, yeah.
Yeah, for interesting reasons too. Yeah, it's always, if I can get on my soapbox real quick. Welcome to my TED Talk. I do a lot of them on the show. It is sort of reflective of this idea that we need to have a kind of this or that declaration of things. We need to compartmentalize. Compartments help absolve us of chaos because chaos is very unmooring. And so if I'm this thing, and I'm not saying you're projecting on a society, but if you say, I am a discovery writer, I am an outliner, whatever it is, it helps you within a larger framework just decide where you are. And even if your true north turns out, magnetically speaking, to be completely off, you can still say, no, that's my true north, even though it's magnetic north. But it to me seems like it is a symptom or a function of a society that has become rigorously bipolar. And I find it fascinating that this was never a conversation when someone like Asimov or Tolkien was writing. But as time has gone on, and obviously it's also because these genres have had more time to decant, if you will, that we have erected more and more barriers to entry, perhaps, though I think they're semi porous, and over time are consistently adding almost like gatekeepers. And even though they're not hard and fast gatekeepers, they're gatekeepers that we allow to be gatekeepers. And it's just such an odd thing to me that in the writing world, there continues to be, at least within spec fic, these sort of draconian rules. And I know I'm being a bit hyperbolic here. I think most people don't give a damn. But it is fascinating to me to see how this dynamic has played out, even over the last, I don't know, 15 years, especially with like Sanderson talking about his laws of the magic system and stuff. I don't know. What do you think of that? Am I just jumping the shark here?
No, I think, like you were saying, people love defining things. It's either this or this, and it always does seem to be a binary system. It can never be, you know, like more of amorphous. But I think for some people, it just there is, and I don't know, man. I'm just talking out my ass most of the time, but I think
Yeah, welcome to the pod.
yeah, for some people, it might be the more you can like label something or categorize something, the less fear or like concern or whatever. I don't know.
Well, writing's a scary thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. When it comes to plotting and pantsing, it's not really that much of a. a big deal, really. But I think, going beyond just talking about writing, I think that's people love categorizing stuff, and it makes them feel maybe safe or comforted because they can say, "Oh, this is this thing, and that's that thing," whatever that might mean.
Always interested to hear these. So, inspiration, books, authors you got to meet in person or just saw a great interview and it inspired you, a panel, whatever it was. What kinds of people or literature inspired you to write, Stephen?
Yeah, I think growing up in the '90s, and if you were reading, you probably read Harry Potter. So, like, Harry Potter was a big thing back then.
So you didn't do Star Trek. I have to admit I've never read any Harry Potter and I have no intention of doing it.
And yeah, that's totally fine. I had been reading, and then I kind of fell out of it, and my timeline is messed up. I don't remember like when the first book came out, but it sort of got me reading again when those books were coming out. And I read like always timed up, so like I would read a book. My oldest brother would come home from college right when the movie was coming out, so we'd always go out and see the movie. And we did that until the third movie. And then after I saw the third movie, it was so different than the book. It ruined the books for me. So I stopped
Oh,
reading the books. I think it was just that it was so different from what I was expecting. Because up until that point, they had been following the books pretty well. But yeah, that was just so jarring. I think it was just like, well, this isn't what it's supposed to be. I'm not gonna, I don't like this anymore. So that like Harry Potter was like a big thing, I think. But yeah, no, I haven't read past the third book, so I don't know what that says.
sorry to interrupt you, but
No, you're fine.
this is an interesting topic. I haven't really got to talk with people about it. I'm not going to make the argument that the book is always better than the film because I know for a fact sometimes the film is better. But do you think if you watched that third Harry Potter today, you might have an appreciation for it now that you didn't at the time?
Yeah, my wife and I will do like a rewatch, not every year, but pretty frequently. So I have seen it since, and it's now the appreciation is just because it's something my wife and I do. It's not
Hmm.
related to the material or anything or the books or the movies. It's just like, oh yeah, this was part of my childhood and I can share it with someone. And with everything going on surrounding the author and stuff like that, it's people are sort of hesitant to say they enjoy it maybe, but it's nothing I was ever very opinionated about as far as like it's a great series, it's a bad series. It's just something that I had experienced and I still watch every now and again.
It is one of those interesting moments where you get to ask the question to some degree or another, come up with a conclusion, which is when you separate art from the author or the artist. In the case of somebody like Bill Cosby, it's a pretty hard and fast thing. You absolutely do it.
Yeah.
I'll never think of the Cosby Show the same way. That's just how it is.
Yeah, he was America's dad.
He was America's dad in a lot of the in a lot of the ways we'd like to forget. But with something like Harry Potter, and I'm not going to go into it. People are interested and they can look into it. It has a lot to do with identity politics. That's the short version. It is really interesting for me to watch how some people react to art and the artist, where the delineation is, and how more often than not people will make a 2, a 10 on the scale of offense. What are your thoughts? Because you've kind of alluded to this, and we don't have to get too political. I don't want to drag you into a quagmire that ruins your career. But let's say we have an author, 10-book series, whatever it is, that maybe said some things 20 years ago they're not entirely proud of. Nothing too inflammatory, but they didn't age well. When you look at the series, and it was a series you loved, it was amazing. What are your thoughts on separating the artist from the art at that point?
Yeah, I think it's tough because if it was something that was so important to you growing up or at any point in your life, and then you find out that that person wasn't really the greatest, if you go back and experience it again, in the back of your mind, it's still kind of like, "Oh, man, this person kinda sucks now." Like, for whatever reason or whatever that may be, I think there was and I can't remember, and it's funny when you talk about things you don't really remember fully, like, is it even worth bringing it up? But anyway, so there was this concept of, like, the death of the author or the death of the artist, so it's, like,
Hmm.
entire separation. If it's a painting, if it's a book, as soon as it's out in the public, you don't consider who made it. It's completely separate. I think, that is a good thing, like, because then you can sort of just experience the thing for what it is and not the person who made it, but it also is important to give credit where credit is due to an extent.
Mm.
I think if you enjoy something, you can enjoy it, but also be aware of its origin.
this is this is probably the weakest flex I could ever make, but I minored in art history
Oh,
and
okay.
I'm that guy. And a big part, I would say 99% of what art history really is about is context. societal, cultural, socio-cultural context. And so it's really interesting, say, and I think I've talked about this on the pod before, which is that it's very interesting to look at Western European art in, say, 1913. And then from 1914 to 1918, a lot of art just isn't getting made because World War One is ripping the world apart, much of the world at least. And those same artists, the fraction that survived or weren't just so wrecked they couldn't even think straight, they came back to their art. And the things they made afterward were, to put it, to really reduce it, it was bananas. It's some of the
Yeah.
most tortured, brutal stuff I've ever seen. When we're talking about connecting the art and the artist or not doing it, that to me is anathema. Like, you can't do that. It's really important with Tolkien, for example, to understand his fascination and, frankly, obsession with Nordic folklore and Northern European, Saxony, all that kind of stuff, folklore, and actual history too. If you are going to enjoy The Lord of the Rings, you need to, obviously, you don't need to, but it certainly doesn't hurt to know about the history he's drawing from and his inspiration he drew from. It's really important when you're looking at the mural Picasso painted called Guernica to understand that it looks so tortured and horrific because he's depicting the bombing of the city of Guernica, just filled with civilians, by Francisco Franco, a dictator in Spain at the time. Like, it is pivotal to understanding the message. You have to have the socio-cultural historical context. So I struggle with this because, like you're saying, the artist is dead. Let's just enjoy the art. But a lot of art has so much symbolism buried in it because that person is a part of history, no matter what art we're looking at. Even if it's the most innocuous stuff, it still is chock full of symbolism representing something like capitalism. There's all kinds of ways we could look at capitalism. It's in our language. Don't waste my time. Time is money.
Yeah.
It's embedded in there. And there's an economy and efficiency to American English, at least, that really does try and stress the rapidity of the thing and the premium of the spoken word. It's really interesting to have that conversation. I don't have any hard and fast conclusions. Like you and I are saying, if it's somebody like Bill Cosby, the artist is dead and good riddance. But certain things always get me wondering when I'm talking with folks is, what's the statute of limitations, and what grade do we where do we rate them on the scale, from, say, 1 being totally innocuous to 10 being Nuremberg trial stuff? Like, where do we rate these people? I don't know. I don't have anything else to go with that. Let's talk more about you.
Well, I think, to that point, though, it's up to the individual, I guess. Do you care who made it? Do you just wanna read the book? Do you wanna look at the painting? Do you wanna listen to the song? Um,
Yeah.
it's up to the individual, I think in the end, yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah, I guess when I try and get all highfalutin, I forget that sometimes, for some people, they like vanilla ice cream. And they don't need to have some reason. They don't need to know the context of vanilla ice cream. It's just they like vanilla ice cream. Yeah. So we're coming back to inspirations. Were you looking to things you'd read in the past as you were writing the Amboy series? So let's just start with the first book, for example. Was there a persons, a series you were sort of channeling while writing it?
So, I'm a huge Coheed and Cambria fan. It's my favorite band.
Yeah, 10-speed bicycle, man.
Yeah, right. I think the way back, like, the fetus version of this story was really based on the well, it's
The
almost the
Armory
same.
Wars.
The Amory Wars, yeah, Amboy series, Amory Wars, I mean, come on.
Oh yeah, snap.
Yeah, it's now what it's become, though, the published work now, it's not, as, similar, but I always like the idea of in the, Amory Wars, there's this group of archmages, and then Willem Ryan is sort of like the ultimate baddie. He, like, kills all the other archmages and sort of, like, runs the show, and he just sort of, like, takes over. And it's been a little bit since I read the Amory Wars, but it was just sort of the idea of, like, this change of government and how that impacts things, and going back to, I'm always interested in, like, the people in power and what they do and how they, handle that power and how it affects people. So there's, like, that aspect to it, and then as far as, like, other influences, it's tough because there's to say, like, how many things subconsciously influence that you don't really know, but I think Coheed and Cambria was a huge inspiration for, like, a lot of the creative stuff that I've done. Just because 'cause I've always been a sucker for, like, an album that has a story behind it. Like, Genesis, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is one of my favorite albums. It's about a
Mm,
dude who goes to, Broadway and gets like I don't know if he has a trip or if he just gets sucked into another dimension, but it is a wild album. You should check it out.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, Coheed was. I remember sitting down with a friend for lunch back in college, and he started telling me about the Amory Wars and how a guy had like a long form conversation with a 10-speed bicycle.
Yeah.
And you take it totally straight and serious because it was done so well. And the idea of concept albums are still, like you're saying, some of my favorite. Catch 33 by Meshuggah is, it isn't the album with their best tracks,
Mhm.
but in my opinion, it is their best album because it's the most cohesive in terms of theme, because it really is kind of one theme. It's monothematical. I might have just made that up.
Sounds real to me.
Yeah, yeah. Look at me with big words. But I think that's really interesting when we're looking at song and album and all these things, is how stories, and this is what I enjoy about real American country. We're talking about, say, Waylon Jennings, George
Mhm.
Jones, the Carter family, all that stuff. These people were American story writers. Like Bob Dylan always gets brought up, and it's because he's absolutely, I can't say now, but at the time when it was Dylan Mania, at least, he was telling short stories. And a lot of great American country does this. Hip hop from the early to mid 90s, some of the best short stories ever, especially from like Gangstar. So it's Guru and Premier, it's Mos Def, Talib Kweli, all these people telling us great stories in 3.5 minutes tops,
Yeah.
right?
MF Doom is another great one.
Oh, MF. Oh, God, I miss MF. Food. I miss food.
Oh, that's my favorite album, and it's an anagram of MF Doom.
It is. Oh my god, it is. Ah, yeah. It's always the weird and cool ones, right?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
always the
Oh,
weird
yeah.
cool ones. I don't know where I was really going with that though. I think it's just fascinating to me how we get to enjoy, and I can't say for certain whether or not this is something across the world when it comes to music, but I wonder if the Western tradition of storytelling, its oral storytelling roots in particular, and the language itself, its organization, its structure, lends itself really well to telling stories like with the Amory Wars and the Coheed and Cambria albums. I wonder if our language is equipped in a way that makes it especially effective at telling stories. What do you think?
Yeah, that could be. I'm not really too sure.
I'm not either. I'm not a
Yeah.
linguist at all. I'm totally out of my depth here.
Yeah, no, I don't know, that's a very good question. I think that it's something, yeah, like, off the top of my head, I don't know. That is you're gonna get me thinking, though. I'm gonna be thinking about this for a little bit because I love, like, how language affects things, the word choice you use, to get an idea across or, convince somebody or something, or even just describe your day. We always, like sometimes you fall back into the comfort words that you're always saying.
Yeah.
But the way yeah, the word choice of and the way you speak to different people day to day, it's I always find that very interesting.
Yeah, code switching. I've always enjoyed listening to code switching and doing it. Let's talk about aliens for a second. Aliens in your book. Why aliens? Because it would have been so easy to say it's mole people or
Right.
people mutated by the haze, and so forth. Why aliens?
I think when you are well, at least for me, what I wanted to do was a story about people in power, and at least from my perspective, I don't feel any connection to the individuals in our government. They feel alien
Hmm.
because they are, you get these sort of sound clips, you get them speaking at a podium, you get them on campaigns and things like that. And they almost don't seem like no one talks like that. I mean, maybe people do. I don't know, but it's so manufactured and it is so alien for like from like day to day life. I grew up in a very small town, like more cows than people, small.
Hmm.
All that stuff always just sort of it never felt genuine. I mean, you have small town politicians, they do feel genuine, and I might be biased. I don't know, but it did feel so separated and so different. So maybe that's where it comes from. I don't know. Not too sure, but I think in the Amboy series, when you have the people running the show aren't from our planet. They don't get it. There's a portion of the book I was really proud of when I wrote it, if I can toot my own horn, but there's a conversation that happens between a character and one of the Amboyans. Essentially, what the conversation boils down to is like, how do you know what's important for us, like from our history standpoint, from cultural standpoints and stuff like that. So I think that's where it all comes from.
Hmm. A lot of people have in my opinion, drank the Elon juice and are a part of the cult. And I find it fascinating how many people, a lot of them lacking purpose and meaning, have glommed onto a hyper narcissist on an orders of magnitude beyond anything I thought Lex Luthor was capable of. And
It is crazy. Oh, sorry to interrupt you
no,
there.
go ahead. I'm interested in talking about this.
It is crazy how quickly, at least if in my circles anyway, it's how quickly society's flipped on him. Like he was,
Yep.
supposed to be this like technological guy who's going to drive us into the future. No pun intended, but like, and now everyone's like, this guy's insane. He's like, this,
He showed his hand. I mean, you buy
yeah,
Twitter, you really do show your hand when all of a sudden you have the keys to the car and you say you're a free speech absolutist, but then you start censoring at scale. It really does get people who were part of the cult going, "Oh crap!" But the thing is, a lot of those people just go to the next one. It's the cult of Rogan. It's the
right.
cult of Elon. Whatever it is.
That's another one too. Joe Rogan. I remember growing up, I was like, "Oh, Fear Factor guy. He's got a podcast. Yeah, let's check it out." And now it's like, "What the heck is this guy talking about?"
Let me get my soapbox again, but Graham Hancock is, and you can appreciate this as somebody with the geosciences background. The Graham Hancock is, I think, the greatest example of a sunken cost fallacy I've ever seen in my life, in that he has been espousing the message of Atlantean civilizations and things that are hyper advanced that we just can't find. And there's a whole, if anybody's interested, Mini Minuteman is an archaeologist on YouTube who watched all of the Graham Hancock Netflix series so you don't have to. And it was really disturbing to see how many of those archaeologists he spoke with, how much of their what they said he took out of context, which doesn't surprise me because he's trying to prop up a premise that is paper thin. But I look at someone like Joe Rogan, who, and I think he's genuine with his just asking questions
Hmm.
defense. I think that's a genuine belief he has. I certainly can think of people who have the just asking questions defense, but clearly have an agenda and are essentially asking a consistent leading question to
Oh
further
yeah.
their agenda. With Joe Rogan, he's had Graham Hancock on the show 3 times now, one quite recently. At two, I will give you some slack because I'm a gentle, generous man. But at three, I have to just say, no, that's it. You don't get to feign ignorance when you have what might be the largest following out of all podcasters on the planet Earth. You don't get to say you're still just asking questions. At that point, I think you have to acknowledge, whether you realize it or not, that you are trying to further a message that is absolutely misinformation at scale. And I think someone like Joe Rogan has a moral and ethical responsibility after a certain point to say, even if I agree with this person, or even if I don't necessarily, but I find what they have to say interesting, I need to stop having these sorts of people on. And again, you and I come from an academic background. We know the value of peer reviewed, robust, high fidelity research. And that is what is so severely lacking from Graham Hancock's stuff there. And my buddies are going to piss themselves when they hear this because I've been ranting about this to them around the campfire for years now. What are your thoughts with, say, podcasters? You're on my podcast. I have almost no following. That's kind of fine with me. But what are your thoughts on podcasters and this kind of cult of personality that's sprung up around people who, for the most part, really aren't your average Joes? They still are celebrities who've been given just another platform. Are we lending too much to them? Are there people out there who do have good intentions and follow through?
There's like a certain level of awareness that you need to have when you have an audience of that size. Like, what am I putting out there, and how will it be received? I guess, and I would imagine, I don't know, but I would imagine that when you're at a level of like a Joe Rogan, you've got a pretty good like understanding of the demographic that you're talking to, and how susceptible they might be to certain opinions and things like that, and whether he's using that to one extent or another. But I think you do have to have a certain level of awareness of how is this going to be taken. So like if I have someone who comes on and says that like dolphins are going to take over the world, they're running the government, and people might believe that. So I think there's like a responsibility there. But again, I don't know.
I want to get off my soapbox here because it is your show, and I feel bad. I'm already
Hey, I
derailing
just
it,
love
but
chatting, man. It's all good.
okay, okay, good. Yeah, neither of us have plans today, so this is going to get weird.
Yeah.
What's more likely? Let's say there are alien civilizations. I mean, just whether it's Drake's equation or any of that stuff. I think it's pretty safe to assume there is intelligent life out there, just at a probability standpoint. Let's say we are in a sort of like 50 years, T minus 50 years to apocalypse situation, whether it's climate related, it's resource depletion, any of that kind of stuff. What's more likely that an alien civilization would come along and help us, even if it's in the capacity you depict in your book, and when in which case it's it's authoritarian, it's totalitarian in a certain sense. What's more likely that we are saved or that we save ourselves?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think we've had a lot of opportunities to turn things around, and we really haven't. All right, well, like I guess, well, the ozone's repaired, so there's that. That big hole is, I think, gone. Last I checked.
Oh, great.
But I might be wrong. I don't know. Like I said, once I got out of the STEM world, I totally just left it all behind. So all of my information is probably like at this point, I don't know, 8 years old. But yeah, I don't know. It's tough. I have a hard time thinking that we can turn it around. But maybe I'm just a pessimist, especially when you're in the academic circle and you know that people have known about this stuff for so long and nothing is changing to like a large scale degree. I mean, or the onus gets put on when the onus gets put on the everyday person and not these like huge corporations and the people in power, but like, no, we're the ones who have to recycle.
Right.
How about instead you just make products that don't use as much plastic? Or how about you cut it off at the source? I mean, maybe I'm kind of going off the rails here, but I don't know. That's how I feel. That's my opinion.
No, I agree, and you use the word onus, which is one of my favorites. The onus really is to a sort of Atlantean degree here, resting on our shoulders. And while I believe that in the aggregate, 350 million Americans, for example, can make quite a difference. Getting all of them to contribute is really difficult. And we don't always make these things convenient. And if there's one thing I've learned about people, it is not necessarily that we're lazy, it's just that we dislike inconvenience. And maybe that's
Yeah.
splitting hairs. But when I was living in Korea, for example, the McDonald's there, the trash bins, there's your regular trash for food, there's trash for cups, but before you put the cup out, there's a little section with that essentially is a funnel, and you pour anything that was in the cup into that funnel and it just gets drained out into a pipe wherever, and then you throw the cup away. I think most Americans would absolutely do that, but because we don't have that somewhere
Mm,
convenient, you get dumpster sauce. That's
yes,
just
exactly.
that's the function of not giving us a way to dump our drinks is dumpster sauce. So I think it's really interesting to see, like you're saying, what we're capable of, what people with far more gravitas, capital are capable of, and how at various levels we fail to resolve some issues that somewhat easily could be remedied. I think that was like three adverbs in a row there. But I think it's fascinating.
And I would like to add, I think a tough part is like we have so many things going on in our lives. We have so many of our own concerns and worries, and it is hard to also worry about this other thing on top of it all. So like,
Hmm.
I don't want to like demonize society. That's not my intent. But like, yeah, we all have like things going on and whatnot. So it is hard to be like, oh wait, I need to do all of this, these other things on top of that. And I think there's a lot of layers. There's too many variables. You know.
Well, societally, yeah, we spend a lot of our bandwidth on things that aren't necessarily essential, but we've made it to the point where a lot of people do feel an existential need to attend to social media,
Yeah.
even though for many people it has nothing to do with, say, propping up their business or organizing community events, whatever it is. But we have created pretty arbitrary weights and measures that we apply to non issues. And I agree with you. I do think we've sort of put the cart before the horse in certain regards, and are just sitting on that cart, lashing nothing, and wondering why the fuck we're standing still.
Yeah.
It is a fascinating relationship we've created with not only social media but with ourselves, that we've kind of signed this contract with social media that we never asked to be a part of this grand experiment. And we could dive into AI and all the potential pitfalls there, and how Skynetty do you want it to get. But instead of doing that,
So that's another podcast.
let's talk about you in the next segment of the author's preface. Doubts, obstacles, you've had inspiration, you've been looking at power structures, for example, deriving inspiration from that. But as you started to look at the Amboy series, did you step back periodically and just think, I have no idea what I'm doing?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I had mentioned earlier, that trunk novel that's never going to see the light of day. I wrote that thing, and like every cliche that could be, what like which cliches are fine. They're cliches for a reason. They work. But when the opening scene is like a dude waking up and looking at himself in the mirror and describing himself. It's just like
Oh, that's the best.
yeah, those classics, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was literally like every character, you know how like in the beginning of musicals, it's like, "I'm the mailman, I'm in love with the coffee," like, like things like that. They describe like, "This is who I am and this is what I do." Like that was basically
As
it.
you know, Bob.
Yeah, 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 as you know, yeah. I had written that, and I could tell it wasn't exactly what I wanted it to be. That went away for a little bit, and I came back to writing, and I was like, "Let me try this thing again, but let me do it in a different sort of way, I guess." So then I wrote that for a little while, and then, yeah, I had that sort of like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I went online. There's so much stuff on YouTube, so I just sort of dove in, and I know I'm sure many people have mentioned Brandon Sanderson's lectures.
There's a long tradition on this show at this point of the Sanderson lectures. Yeah.
But I will say, if you wanna be a writer, if you are a writer, watch those videos. They are so, so good. And if he has the Writing Excuses podcast as well, which I don't know if he's on as often anymore.
No, him and Dan Wells started tangentially speaking. I can't remember the name of it.
Oh, it's, Intentionally Blank.
Intentionally blank.
But they don't really talk about writing.
That is a good pod, but yeah, they talk about it periodically, but it's mostly Dan Wells talking about food heists. I couldn't give a damn about food heists. I
I
don't,
I think those are pretty funny, though, I'll be honest. I think they're pretty funny, yeah.
and that's fine if you like it. Like there's something for everybody, but
Mm.
it is interesting that since they don't really talk about it, when they do, it's so much more interesting.
Oh, and some of their best episodes are where they break down, like, writing craft stuff, and,
Mhm.
like, yeah, to each their own. Sometimes you need an episode about, like, rating movies from the '80s or whatever it was that they did. No, when they do go into, like, the sort of, nuts and bolts of writing, and they talk about, like, I think there's an episode they talked about, like, their favorite, fiction writers. That was a really great one too, 'cause I mean, I know, like, your Guy Gavriel Kays, I know all those classics, but there are a few that I didn't recognize, so that was nice. I like when they do stuff like that. But I also think I forgot the question, so
I did too. That's the fun part of the show. It was kind of like doubts. So when you're looking at your work, obviously there are all these resources. I wanted to ask you because I've been considering this lately. Have you ever experienced writer's block?
Yeah, I think because, I mean, you could describe writer's block in so many ways.
And that's what I wanted to talk about too. Like, what
Yeah.
is it? And because I have what might be a bit of controversy here, which is that I don't think it exists, but
Mm,
I'm open to hearing points of contention. So, what do you think writer's block is? Because I think we all just assume it means I have no ideas, but
yeah.
I think that's a bit too reductionist. What do you think writer's block is?
For me personally, when I feel like I have writer's block, what's going on is I'm like overwhelmed. I'm not focusing on where I'm at in the story and what I need to write. I'm not hitting my marks, I guess, so to speak. Like
Hmm.
what's going on in this scene, what's going on in this chapter, I'd say 9 times out of 10, I can get into it. This past year, I had a terrible, terrible time. I almost like burnt out entirely. I had to like step away from writing for a little bit and just sort of ease up and figure out what the heck was going on.
That's the wise thing to do, though.
Yeah, it was so, like, essentially what I did last year was I had to rewrite the 4th book in the Amboy series, like, entirely. I think 90,000 words written, and it was not working out, so I had to go
Ugh.
back. Yeah, I had spent the whole year rewriting it, and, like, that skeleton is still sort of there, but it's so much better. Like, it's probably the best thing I've ever written.
Isn't that fucking awesome?
Yeah.
Like, I rewrote the first third of my novel almost 2 times, and it made it so much better, and
Oh,
I
it
was
does.
dreading it. I'm sure you were too, like, hitting
Yeah.
the delete key on, 90,000 words. I think that was about the same for me, and I have yet to edit something that afterward was worse.
Mhm.
than when I started. Yeah, it's really interesting process. So the idea of being overwhelmed, if we're just kind of taking a sort of nebulous collection of what you're saying there, you think that writer's block is a writer who's overwhelmed?
I think for me, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't speak for everyone, but yeah, so it's like overwhelmed in the sense of like, where are you at in the story? Is it going where you want it to go? Or is this sort of like, it's just, are you just heading in a direction like, I need to write. So I'm just going to keep writing. And then you get to a point where it's like, none of this makes sense. This, like, these characters don't even sound the same anymore, which is where I had gotten essentially in that first draft of book four. I had a character who completely changed it. They weren't even the same, but I had it in my head that I just had to hit my word goals for the day, and it just sort of got ahead of me. And then when I got to that 90,000 word point and I looked at it all, I gave it to my editor and I gave her a heads up. I was like, look, this is not what I want it to be, but I want you to check it out. And she's like, yeah, this is kind of rough. She's like, you got some good parts, here, here, and here, but overall, I think it's not your best stuff. I'm like, okay, I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah. Did that conversation kind of lead you into, like you said, just taking a break?
So that was before I had actually, so that was 2022 when I had that conversation with my editor, and then 2023, I was like, "Okay, I'm just gonna go right back into it." And I'd gotten, I think, till about, like, March, April, and I didn't wanna write, wasn't interested in it. I think part of it was just, like, I didn't wanna tell the same story I'd already told myself because I was like, "I already wrote this thing. I need to be moving on to the next thing." I felt like I was falling behind, sort of. So, like, it was this sort of compounding thing where it was like, I knew I had to rewrite it. I didn't want to because I wanted to keep moving forward, but if I didn't rewrite it, I couldn't move forward. So it was just like this cycle that I fell into. And then, yeah, so I think I took May and June. I barely wrote. And if I was writing, it was totally unrelated. I've got like a fantasy series on the back burner that I've been playing around with. But even that was like, I was struggling there too. And then July, I was just like, you got to have fun with this again. Like, whatever you want to do right now, you need to just do that and have fun. And don't worry about how much you're writing or what it is, or even if it makes sense. You just got to figure out what you want to do and do it. And so I wrote this 20,000 word short story about these. It's sort of like a combination between Brave Little Toaster and The Umbrella Academy.
Yeah. Nice.
It's a really cool story. I'm excited to get that one out eventually. But and then once I finished that, I was like, okay, like I'm back sort of thing. And it was smooth, like relatively smooth sailing through the rest of the year. I got those revisions done, and I got like what I could call like the second draft of book four finished, and now I'm going through and revising it and even reading it. Like, I hate doing revisions, but like I'm going through the chapters and I'm like loving it so much. It's awesome.
That's awesome. So, because I'm sure there are some people either after this comes out or far, far into the future who are experiencing something classified as writer's block. What's some advice you'd give those people?
I'd say, like, just take a step back, figure out where are you at in the writing process, I guess. Like, are you just drafting? Because if you're just drafting, then give yourself a break. It's the early draft. I can't remember who, if it's a Neil Gaiman quote or Gaiman. It's like you're just sort of like putting all the grains of sand together at that point. Yeah, so if you're just early drafts, just have fun with it. Exploratory, right? If you have to, like, don't worry about your outline. Just get the thing done. Keep writing. If you're in revisions, that's a little tougher because I hate revisions. I'm sure most people do. I know if you have to, like, don't ever force yourself because that won't get you anywhere. That you'll just hate it and you'll end up hating what you're doing. But like, maybe take a week off, take a month off, read some more books, whatever books you that got you interested in writing. Read those books again, or read that same author, or watch a movie, watch a TV show. During that sort of downtime, my wife and I watched The Yellow Jackets, and that's like such a cool show. It's like so different from anything that I write or anything I read, and it was just so different. And I was like, it's really cool too. It's just a great show. You should check it out. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, and I was reading some paranormal stuff. I was reading some horror. I was just trying to get away from what I was currently doing. But yeah, so I would say, like, go do something that is either like totally different or just, not in your wheelhouse. Just try and get away from it for a little bit, I think. And then if that doesn't work, at that point you just got to maybe make a list, say like, I'm going to do this thing, then I'll do this thing, because that's what I did too. I was like, okay, here's the major issue that I have with this story and how can I tackle it? And then I sort of broke that down. Like, if you can break things down into smaller bits, it doesn't seem so overwhelming. So I think that's pretty important.
Baby steps, you're testing the waters, you're committing yourself to this thing. You started a book, it's something you're just discovering, you've got inspiration from multiple sources. What was it like?
I think in the beginning, I was just having fun with it, you know? I didn't know what I was doing, to be honest. I was just like, "I wanna write a book, so I'm gonna write a book." And then I think that's where that trunk novel ended up because I didn't know what I was doing. But yeah, watching the stuff on YouTube, Brandon Sanderson's lectures sort of gave me the idea of like, okay, this is how you plot, this is how you have a character arc, and sort of like that sort of thing was really helpful. And then once that first book was done, I was like, okay, on to the next one. I got to keep this up. Like, let's keep
Mhm.
going. And it sort of snowballed from there. I will say that first book, Along the Perimeter, the first book in the Amboy series, it's a slow burn because it's a lot of world building and a lot of character setup and stuff. If people have patience to get through that one, I think they'll enjoy the rest of the series. There's a award in the UK. It's called the Wishing Shelf Book Award, and they have a panel of reviewers, and you get all the reviews back at the end. They're just for you. They're not like they don't go anywhere. But one of the reviewers said that Along the Perimeter was like starting an old car on a cold day. I just love that. I love it so much.
That's good.
Yeah, but then, the other reviewers are like, "Oh, it's got, like, this Tolkien-esque level of storytelling," and I was like, "Holy shit." Like,
Yeah.
that's awesome to hear that kind of thing. So you get, like, that nice juxtaposition of those 2 things, and it really, like I appreciate that because if someone just said, like, "This is the best thing I've ever read," and, like, that was it, they're not being honest, I don't think anyway. So, yeah, after you sort of get that feedback and stuff, and it really helps you sort of take a step back and say, like, "Okay, book 2, I need to work on, like, my pacing." I think the pacing in book 2 is pretty solid, and I've just been learning as I go. Each book is getting better and better, so
When you're going through, say, reviews, you get some good stuff like it's Tolkien-esque. What do you do with a negative review? Because some people I've talked to, I think it was Liz Libby, how much of that you actually give credence to is based on, for somebody like Liz and for myself too, is based on statistics. If one person says it was trash, that's an opinion. If two say it, okay, might be something there. If three say it, then three's a party, and you've probably got issues there. Have you received some negative criticism, even if it wasn't like the whole book is trash? It was just certain aspects, like you're saying, pacing. What do you do with that sort of feedback?
yeah, I think it does depend on where it's coming from. If there's, like, a one-star review on Amazon and it said, like, "This book is trash," then you don't take that to heart.
Right.
There's no, meat on those bones there. But if someone, like if they give it a one-star review and they sort of break it down and there's a little more thought to it, then, yeah, I think you should consider that. But also, you don't have to consider it either. You're like, if you're writing books, you're doing it because, like, you want to write and you wanna tell a story. So, ultimately, what people think about it, like, does it matter to a degree? Maybe. Depends on, do you wanna make it your living? Are you trying to write to market? Then, yeah, you should consider those things. But if you're just writing because you wanna write stories, then I don't know, someone's gonna like it. There are how many people in this world? All you have to do is find your audience, so which is tough, though I don't wanna make it sound like it's easy, but finding your audience is very difficult. It's something I still struggle with. But I think, yeah, if you get negative reviews, positive reviews, whatever they are, look at where they're coming from and the substance to them, and then consider if you should actually listen to what they're saying.
Mhm. Let's pivot a bit here. With the rise of self publishing, more and more you see it in podcasts, but there are all kinds of books about this, all sorts of interviews with people you can look up. I am not deeply enmeshed in this world, so I want to put that out there right away. But I've seen what I consider to be a somewhat disturbing trend, and I don't think it's a new trend, but I think it is. I find a bit concerning, which is that with self-publishing, it seems like more people are writing to make a product as opposed to writing to make art. And that, to me, art writing is art. I think some people think art is physical; it's a statue or it's a painting, but no, writing is art. 100%. Music is art, all that stuff. Have you seen this trend that there are more people more concerned with producing mass quantities of literature? And sometimes I use that word loosely, and I know I sound pretty snobby and elitist about this, but have you noticed a trend with people, especially when we're looking at the podcast sphere? Is there a far louder voice saying books need to be a product before they need to be art?
It's an interesting question. I maybe personally haven't seen that so much. A lot of the indie authors that I know are like, this is a story I've always wanted to tell and I want to get it out there. And yeah, they want to make it look nice for sure. I mean, you could talk you could talk about like how there's a lot of the special edition stuff. That's sort of seems like more of a product thing. But again, there's if there's buyers for it and you can make money off of it and that you're trying to make writing your job, then yeah, go for it if you can make like a solid product for sure. But I think for the most part, a lot of the authors that I've spoken with are like, I just wanted to write a story. I wanted to, make something that I would want to read. But no, there is definitely this sort of this other side of it where it's like, look at this special edition and the gold foil and better get it now kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like there is definitely that aspect to it. I would do that if the opportunity came up for sure. But I would do it because I would want it on my shelf. You know what I mean? Like I'd be like, yeah, that's my book and it looks awesome.
Absolutely. And I get that impulse, that intuition too. The idea that, yeah, why wouldn't I like to see, because if it were me, I'd be going to people who enjoy the work and say have a DeviantArt page and saying, I love what you're doing. I would love to put out another cover of this. Would you be willing to do that? That's a win-win for everybody. The person who enjoys the work gets to do something. They're making fan art, but it's going to be on a bookshelf. It's a lot of people winning at a lot of levels, but the re-releases is an interesting conversation, and we talked about this briefly before the mics went hot. With a lot of people doing that, why do you, and if you're not quite sure, that's fine, because I don't think I am, but why do you think so many, particularly self-pub folks, and this isn't an indictment, Zamal Akhtar, who I've had on the show, and he's a wonderful guy, just did a really successful Kickstarter to get another cover out for his Gunmetal God series. Why do you think there is such a proliferation of new sleeves for all these books? Where's this coming from?
I could only speak to what I would do in this situation, and I love the cover art for my series. I'm very lucky. I work with a guy named Tom Edwards in the UK. His website's Tom Edwards Art, I believe. I might be getting that totally wrong, and I'm sorry, Tom, if
No,
if
it'll
you ever
be in
hear
the
this.
show notes. All my stuff goes in the show notes.
But I don't even remember how I came across him, but, I love the artwork that he does for the Amboy series. If I ever had the opportunity to do, like, a special edition, I would want him to do the cover art again, but I'd also wanna reach out to other artists and have them do interior artwork because it's like, when you're first starting out, you don't really maybe you don't have the means to do, like, what you had envisioned, so when you get a following, you get more of a foundation in, you have a little more money, you can do a Kickstarter, you can raise that money, then you can sort of how many 5, 6 years down the road, you can re-release that book to how, like, maybe you wanted it to be in the beginning. I could see that being the thing.
Mhm. When we come back to testing the waters, I've seen a lot of this kind of question leveled at filmmakers. People will be watching Martin Scorsese sit down with someone, and they'll be grilling him, and he'll take audience questions. A lot of the questions always end up with something to the effect of, "Do you need to go to film school to be a great filmmaker?" Did you attend any kind of writing classes? If so, or if not, do you think they are a requirement?
No, I've never done any sort of, like, official, writing class thing. The closest thing is just the lectures that I've seen online, and I don't think they need to be a requirement. If you wanna write and you really wanna write, you'll figure it out to the point
Hmm.
where it's, good enough, and then you can have a friend look at it. If you want to find beta readers, if you want to hire an editor, then you can have those conversations to sort of improve it. I think you can, especially with the internet nowadays, you can figure out stuff so easy on your own. But if you want to take a writing class, me personally, I would only ever do it to then make connections and then
Mm.
maybe find a writing group from that class. If the professor or whoever's running it, maybe they're somebody of note or they've got accolades of some kind, talk to them and pick their brain. I think that's the only reason I would ever do it.
Hmm. Hard pivot here, because this is a question on my list, and there is no elegant way to slide into this line of questioning here. Stephen, let's talk about super volcanoes for a moment here. How
Oh yeah.
likely is it that Yosemite will have a super volcano that wipes out civilization?
I think it's gonna happen at any moment.
Are you
Like,
serious?
I would not be surprised, yeah. That hotspot, it's ready to go, man. No, I don't
Shit.
know.
We all be sitting on a caldera and have no idea.
Yeah, we just need, Pierce Brosnan. Actually,
At
funny story,
Dante's
so he was
Peak. Yeah.
yeah, but Dante's Peak, but he was just arrested, because he, like, trespassed in Yosemite. He went to the
What?
yeah, like, so there's the hot springs that are, like, dangerously, like, will kill you hot, and he was, like he went off the trail and, like, was going towards them, so he got, like, arrested. He has to go to court and stuff, but that's besides the point. I just thought it was funny it's Pierce Brosnan doing it.
You could take the man out of the action film, but
Yeah, he's confused. He thinks he's living it.
he is getting older. Um, so, what is a super volcano? Because I've always been, it's been explained to me that it's various chambers underground, all kind of contributing to a kind of mega explosion, but like, what is a super volcano, and why should people be terrified and never sleep well at night from this point onward?
So if I remember correctly, and I'm sure my geology professors are like their ears are ringing, they don't know why or something like that. But so the specifically the one that's in Yosemite, the crust there is like super thin, even though it's like continental crust, it's like super thin. And you have like a magma chamber underneath it. I don't know, dude. I'm just trying to remember this as best I can. But if I do, yeah, if I recall right, the continental crust there is very thin, and so there's all this pressure building up, and it is like a large chamber of hot rock, and
Mm.
yeah, it's gonna explode and throw a bunch of ash into the atmosphere and like block out the sun and all that cool stuff, and then it travels as particulate matter likes to do. So New York will be affected, and I won't like that.
I've got a true or false question for you. Sharks are older than trees. True or false?
Oh man, yeah, that is true.
It is true. Yes, sharks are older than trees. Isn't
I
that
love this. This is
bananas?
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just a writing podcast, even. I thought that was so cool. What is that anecdote? And it's probably just an anecdote and it's not entirely true, that sharks have just stopped evolving because they are already the perfect killer, right?
Yeah, there is something to that, yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me.
There was, the Dunkleostasis or Dunkleostosis? I can't remember the pronunciation, but it's like a shark that's skull is on the outside of its head. It's just this, like
What?
it's got this, like, armor plating on its forehead. It's a cool animal, yeah.
Well, since we're talking about armor plating, and thanks for the setup here, because here we go. You, myself, and Henry Cavill are all big Warhammer 40k guys. We all hang out, by the way. But Warhammer 40k actually quite totalitarian if we're talking about the Imperium of Man. So let's talk about this for a second. And if people don't know what we're talking about and don't care, there's probably a timestamp in the show notes. I'll try and provide that for you. But it's Warhammer 40k, so you should be paying attention. Favorite Legion and favorite Primarch?
Yeah, I play Thousand Suns, so I just have to say Thousand Suns and Magnus, like, that's that's it.
That was the correct answer, by the way. That was the only correct answer. So we're talking about like at least aesthetically Onks and Egyptian style kind of mythology and folklore,
Yeah.
but hardcore magic. Magnus still just hanging out in his tower still, as far as I know. He hasn't come out, right?
I'll be honest, my knowledge of lore is, like, very little.
I gotta say, that is a great faction you've chosen, though. That is like top three.
But so I was always like I was aware of 40K. It was always sort of on the periphery of my knowledge. And then when the pandemic sort of hit, all my buddies were like, "Okay, we're gonna get into Warhammer. We need something to do." So each of us picked a faction, and I was like looking at them all, and I was like, "Oh, dudes made of dust that can do magic. Yeah, that's awesome. I'll do those guys. That's great."
Yeah, they really are like dust souls like inhabiting and
Yeah.
animating suits of armor.
It just gets, like, worse and worse from there, like, they trick people into getting into these mech suits because they tell them that they're gonna show them how to do their magic, but they're not. They're just, like,
Yeah.
getting tortured, and their pain fuels the machine. It's crazy stuff.
It's so good. It's so grimdark. It's so grimdark. There was a Reddit thread called r/grimdank, and
Oh, yeah,
it's
I
it
know
yeah, a
that.
grimdank. Yeah. So I have my own, and it usually is Magnus, but since we've already chosen that one, I got to say White Scars and Jagatai Khan,
Yeah, yeah.
space Mongols with jet bikes, and not just space Mongols, but like hyper human killing machine Mongols with jet bikes. You can't lose with that. That has all the
Right, right.
makings of greatness. It's fascinating to me.
If I had to pick a runner up, I think Mortarion would be up there for sure. Like, just this, like, pestilence god. Yeah,
Yeah, Pestilence, Grandpa Nurgle. I do
yeah.
like Nurgle out of the
Oh, yeah, I
Chaos
guess
Gods.
Mortarion's the Primarch, right? Yeah, I'm getting
Mhm.
that right. But then Nurgle's the sort of deity. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Grandpa Nurgle, or Papa Nurg, as I like to call
Yeah.
him. But Nurgle is interesting because since he represents decay, some people argue that he's not a chaos god in the evil sense, because decay leads to life. You burn all of the
Mm.
dead wood, you have a controlled burn so that can make way for new life. If there's trees crowding and not allowing other younger saplings to come up, then they need to go, they need to decay, they die. And I've heard some compelling arguments for how Papa Nurg is actually the most beneficent of the Chaos Gods, which
Yeah.
is oxymoronic, but still fascinating, fascinating. Well, thanks for coming back to the actual writing pod. We will start talking about setbacks, and let's do that right about now. Setbacks, this is always interesting. Everybody has their own challenges. Sometimes it's job, it's family, all that stuff. So, Stephen, why don't you tell us about the setbacks you encountered once you got much more into writing?
Yeah, I think, most of my setbacks have all been internal. It's all, like, me being too hard on myself. Everyone in my life has been extremely supportive about this. It's never been anyone saying, like, "You can't do this," or "You shouldn't do this," or "It's a waste of time," or my wife has been like, so supportive. She's, like, my biggest cheerleader when it comes to this stuff. She doesn't understand, like, the hobbyist side of my life, but she's like, "Yeah, you like doing that, go do it." And then, yeah, my when I told my parents that I was, like, gonna start writing, they're like, "Oh, that's so cool." My mom is the first person to buy my books, and she, like, reads them
Oh,
and whatnot, which she, like her usual books are, like, slice of lifey type things, I guess, like,
yeah.
that's right, and then she reads a lot of, like, nonfiction stuff, but, yeah, so she found out she's like, "I don't really read science fiction, but I'm gonna try it," and then she loves it, so that's cool, and she's also my mom, so she's gonna love it anyway, but
Yeah, of course. Yeah, my dad read some of my stuff and it was kind of hit or miss, but my mom's like, I love it. It's the best.
yeah. Like, yeah, like I was saying, it's a lot of internal stuff, like thinking it's not good enough, or why am I not hitting these word counts, and then that sort of just kind of like spirals in on itself. So a lot of like my setbacks have been like, I set these goals and maybe I don't hit them, and then I like beat myself up about that. That's a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
Where do you think that comes from? Because I was raised Catholic, and the idea that shame and guilt are a baked in flavor in your crust is just that's how it is. And I have this thing called the Catholic cattle prod. It's the reason I
Oh
do
yeah.
the things I do to this day. Like if I didn't have it, I wouldn't be here talking with you right now. And the Catholic cattle prod, it sure as hell is motivating, but it's not enjoyable. It can be abrasive, it can twist my guts. It can be a shock in a certain way, like existential shock at 3 in the morning.
Mhm.
And I hate it sometimes, but I also objectively recognize the motivational power it lends me. I have a Tony Robbins screaming at me in my head most days of the week. Again, I'm not advocating for a masochistic approach to productivity. I don't think that's healthy at all. And I've managed to figure out how this works, but that's because I've had 40 years at this point to figure out how I can make chaos into creativity most of the time. So for me, a lot of it comes from an upbringing, especially with a pretty hardworking family, where everything is you demonstrate the quality of your character through what you produce, and that's really difficult for a writer to do because the process takes time, and a lot of people don't see a book with the same utility as say a bridge. So for me, it comes from a place of loathing, contempt, guilt, shame. Catholics are supposed to feel bad about going to the bathroom. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
Where does it come from for you? Where is this? If I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but like, where's this guilt come from?
I think you and I are very similar in that sense. I was raised Catholic as well, so, like, baptized, first communion, confirmation, the whole thing. I did
Yeah,
all of it.
CCD.
Yeah. I didn't want to. I realized this was not what I wanna do, but my mom was like, "Can you just do it for me?" So I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So, like, the pastor knew too. He's like, "Is there anything you gotta talk about? You wanna talk about anything?" I was like, "Nope. Nope. Just get me out of here. I'm done." But I know, I think there is that level of, yeah, that sort of ingrained, whatever it is, I don't know, but I think that has a big part of it, and then yeah, like you were saying as well, a hardworking family, it's not like my parents were like, "What have you made today?" It wasn't like that. Like, we would cut wood every summer for the following, fall and winter, and my dad had a system down where he's like, "The more times we have to touch the wood, the less efficient it is. So how can we do this, as efficiently as possible?" So then there's, like, that level of it too.
Do you find yourself doing that? Because I'm all about efficiencies because of the
Oh, yeah.
same experience. Do you just find yourself constantly trying to figure out how to shave a second off?
Yeah, we're doing a move at the end of the month, and I was packing up some books today, and I literally, like, stacked all my books by dimension and then, like,
Mm.
Tetrised them in. I was like, "How can I do this so I can fit as much in here as possible?" Like, that's just how my brain always works, and I was like, efficiently and, like, to a level that I have in my head where I know it can be as well. And I think when it comes to writing, that's what really gets me is like what little time I have in the day to write, am I using it how I should be? And then is the end result what I want it to be? And I think when that doesn't happen, if I don't get the time or I feel like it's wasted time spent writing, then it's just kind of like, well, what am I doing here? Like
Mm.
I should be like writing X amount of words every day. I should have had these revisions done by now. So there's like that sort of self-talk is it can be very impactful in a negative way, but in a positive way if you can turn it around. But for me, sometimes it's very negative. Yeah.
That was my next question is when you don't make word count, and I've certainly been there. It sounds like we've got a lot in common here. It can be a pretty abusive relationship with myself. I've come up with some strategies for it. Drinking really helps.
Oh yeah.
Now, I found out I'm hypoglycemic. Apparently, you're not supposed to drink if you're hypoglycemic. And looking at things in hindsight, it's all coming together now. So I don't really
Isn't the
drink much
hindsight the
anymore.
greatest in that way? It's like, oh
Oh,
yeah, that
it's
makes so
just
much sense.
what a treat. What a treat. But some days I can say, you know what, Sam? The last 2 days, you've written 4 hours each night and you did this thousands of words. Consider this almost like the rollover. You did this much. So on this third day, you didn't hit word count. Just imagine all the excess you had. You can roll it over, you can compensate. Some nights that works. I did that 2 nights ago where I did a morning session and an evening session, which is tough for me. I usually don't have time because of my day job. I'm sure you can relate. And I was able to justify one night, but then another night just go, dude, this is bullshit. You know, you could sit back down and do more. You know, you can. You've done it before, but here you are sitting in front of your computer playing Red Dead Redemption for the 300th hour. Like, what are you doing? Do you really want to be a writer or do you just want to call yourself a writer? And those are some really abusive conversations I have with myself. And I've had some luck in with like cognitive behavioral therapy strategies looking at what's actually happening here at a metacognitive level. And sometimes I can chop through that Gordian knot of just guilt and self-loathing. Some days I just stare at it and I don't know what to do with it. What kind of strategies have you developed over the years to try and combat these the voices?
Yeah, all these voices in my head.
Yeah.
Um, I like as far as the word count stuff, like not hitting a word count. Since I started like sort of taking writing seriously, I've been tracking my daily word count, and I sort of get an idea of like the rhythm I fall into, and you can see it when you plot it on a scatter plot. You can see like there's a usually a dip around the middle of the year, and then it comes back. But I think what I've figured out is on average, if I can write 600 words a day, which I can pretty regularly, I can write 600 words a day. That's like Monday through Friday. Like don't write on the weekends if you if you don't want to or you don't have to. It's you need your weekends. But that being said, I woke up yesterday morning and I wrote like 2,000 words. So like, well, don't listen to
Hey.
me. I don't know what I'm talking about.
This is what we do, guys. Like this is just what we do.
So I figure I can hit 600 words pretty regularly, and then if I do that, Excel in the little like cell it turns green, and like when it turns green, I just get this like a rush of like good feelings. So it's I just have to set that sort of like set that up for myself. So it's like okay, you put a number in, and then it lights up. But the flip side of that is if I don't hit that, it turns red, which is
Oh,
like sometimes it's motivation, sometimes it bums me out. But
yeah.
that like those sort of things. Like figure out how you work as a writer or whatever, like figure out how your brain responds to things and figure out like what's working for you and just stick to it. Last year, I set my daily word count at 1,000 because I was like, if I can do 600, I can do 1,000. But in reality, that's 400 more words, which sometimes it's not a big deal, but sometimes hitting 600 is like a struggle. And on top of that, last year I was rewriting the entirety of book four. So like I had to do rewrites and I wanted to write new stuff. And I think it's just like this compounding thing of like I wasn't hitting my 1,000, didn't want to do revisions, and I think that's what really contributed to my like close to burnout sort of thing that I went through. But yeah, like figure out a reasonable goal. If you hit it, keep going if you want to. If not, you can stop. You hit your 600 words or whatever it is. So like go watch an episode of Alone. Like it's a great show.
Yeah. No, I totally agree on your point on taking days off. I always take Saturdays off if I can help it. Some days I can't. I still did a bunch of editing for the pod folks will hear before this one. but it was really easy editing. I'd already done one pass. My second pass is it's the equivalent of just doing line and copy edits in a novel. So that's fine. But I didn't write. Well, no, that's not true. I did. I previewed because I'm doing the fifth draft. I'm starting it tonight actually, and I previewed all the chapters in the first act. I went through and cleaned some up. I did a little bit of notes in the margins for myself, but that took almost an hour and a half, I think. But it was enjoyable because I'm excited to do this next draft. It feels like strong work. I like where this story is. I'm proud of what the story is, what it means thematically, the character arcs. I love it. So I'm eager to start tonight, and I think I can do at least 2 chapters tonight because I'm sure you've experienced this too. The further you get, the quicker it goes. Ultimately, let's say I were doing a first draft. I absolutely would make sure 1 day a week I didn't do anything writing related unless it was little ideas percolating from time to time that I just wanted to record. I think that gets lost on a lot of writers because you get into the zone, it feels good, you're productive, it's like a drug, but you really do have to take a vacation, even if just for a day a week. And also, some writers work full time jobs that are grueling and then say to themselves, no, I got to make word count. I got it in. They're up till 2 in the morning. They skipped helping their kid with their homework, all kinds of stuff. It's not just your mental health, it has a collateral effect. So I think it's really wise of you to not only do that, but just to share that with folks because I think that something gets lost. It's two parts, which is make time for yourself and have fun. Those are two things I don't hear enough writers say they do.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, yeah, you need to have a certain level of, I'm not sure what the right word is, but like, you need to have a certain level of, okay, I need to sit down and do this, but it has to be balanced with, how do I feel about doing this right now? Am I really forcing myself to sit down and write? You know, for me anyway, most of the time, if I do that, the stuff I'm writing isn't good anyway. So it's just a waste of time. I have to go back and fix it all. So, like,
Exactly.
yeah, I got the words down. I got the word count. I got to like type in my Excel sheet that I did it, but was I having fun, and am I gonna have to go fix all that stuff anyway? So, like, at that point, you're like, go draw, go outside, go on a walk, do something else, you know? But at least that's what I do anyway. I have to, like, physically do something else.
100%. Everybody I talk to who knows what they're talking about when it comes to riding goes for walks.
Mhm.
I cannot stress enough to people who aren't walking if they're capable of doing so. Obviously, go for walks. I always think of it as like you got a plot hole you're trying to fix. You've been mulling it over in front of a blank page for the last hour, and you're starting to just go crazy. It's a Rubik's cube that is all tangled up. I believe in the muse. Some people don't. And in this case, just replace it with your brain. Go for the walk, activate your body, take your mind off things, and let the problem, the Rubik's cube, run in the background. It's a background app running. And I guarantee you, I mean, or at least like 9 times out of 10, going for that walk, the Rubik's Cube will snap into place. It has happened to me so many times. It is reliable at this point. Like, I know I can get stuff done if I do that. It happened the other day. I don't think enough people, especially writers, because we get this romanticized image of they're always hunched over a piece of paper or a keyboard, and it's so romanticized that they're in a manic sprint driving themselves crazy. It's like, oh yeah, this is wonderful. Yeah, who wouldn't want to do that? But they don't see any of these people getting out of their chairs to go for walks, and it's to me it's strange.
Yeah, it's when I hear people say like, "Oh, it came to me like the problem for this issue or whatever it was." I can't tell you how many times I've been at work doing something and I'm like, "Oh shit, if I do
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z, that solves all my problems." So I have a little notebook, like a tiny, tiny notebook, and I'll just be like, quick little note about like, "Oh, you know, this guy has to go do this thing or say this thing," and it's crazy how often that happens because
Yeah.
you might not be actively, like you said, it's running in the background. You're not actively thinking about it, but if you spend enough time in a world that you've built or like you're writing, you're plotting, doing all this stuff, it's gonna come to you eventually. Like it totally will. I never thought that was a thing. I didn't believe in it, but it has happened countless times.
So, new title for this section. It used to be Going Pro, and then for a million reasons, I realized that is a terrible title for this section. So now it's actualization. And Stephen, you're the first one to get actualized here. So, if it's something you're still figuring out, awesome because it's the journey and the journey never ends. But when did you realize you had become the author you'd fantasized about, that you dreamt of becoming? When did you realize you'd become that person? Or is that something you're still striving toward?
Yeah, I think if we had had this conversation before this weekend, I would have given a completely different answer. But
Oh,
yesterday,
really?
yeah, I had this crazy moment yesterday where I was doing revisions and I had to like look at one of the previous books in the series, and I like picked it up and I was flipping through it, and like I've put 3 physical books, 1 ebook out at this point, so 4 books total. But for some reason, like when I picked up the book and I was flipping through it and I was reading what I had written, it just all hit me. And I was like, holy shit, like I have put these books out. I did it. I don't know why it took this long for me to realize that, but it was such a crazy feeling, man. Like it was I'm trying to hang on to that, you know?
Congrats, man. That's a fantastic moment because you get to
Yeah.
hold the body of your work. The corpus is there and you get to refer to things you wrote prior. That's fantastic. I'm happy for you.
Yeah, I don't know what it was, to be honest, because 'cause I've gotten, back when I published Along the Perimeter, I got the, proofs and stuff, so I had the proofs in hand, but I think at that point, it still felt like this isn't a finished product. I can't
Mm,
say I did this yet because it's not done, but then even when I published, my brain immediately went to, "Okay, book 2, gotta keep going, book 2." And there was a sort of that same sort of cycle. You get the proofs, you add like, do as much marketing as you can, and it goes out, it publishes, some people buy it, reviews come in, and then I was like, "Okay, book 3, let's keep going." But I don't know what it was, yesterday, I was just like, "Holy shit. I I wrote these things, I'm an author." Have I, like, got to where I wanna be? No, I think there's still a lot I want to do. There's still a lot I would like to do and accomplish and stuff. That's always changing, I think, but I'm at a really cool point, I will say, where I'm, like,
mm.
kind of, acknowledging what I've done and saying, like, "Yeah, I did this thing, and it's really cool, and you should check it out, and I'm very proud of it." Like, yeah, I would not have felt this way 2 days ago, but yeah.
That's excellent. That's excellent. There's a kind of rich and vivid quality to it. And to be honest, if I were on the other end of this conversation, I don't know. I'm not quite sure how I would answer it. I would certainly consider myself a writer, but fully actualized. I think you and I are in a similar camp where it's here's the thing. Well, actually, I'm not because I feel like you've elevated and sort of you leveled up. We'll put it that way. I consider myself an author. I could print everything out, hold it in my hands. I published in an anthology. I'm going to be self-publishing something pretty soon. It's just a short story, but it doesn't quite hit you because, like you said, what's next? Boom, 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 boom. And that's something I wonder where we come back to the conversation about a lot of people writing a product, not art. I wonder how many of them ever quite have that moment that you had where they got to stop and have that moment instead of the trap you and I have both fallen into, which is next book, next book, next book, or next draft, next draft, next draft. I wonder how many people have deprived themselves because really only they can give themselves that experience. How many people might have deprived themselves of the opportunity to have that revelation, to have that moment of auto charity, we'll call it that way. But
Yeah, there you go.
yeah, that's fascinating though. I'm really happy for you. Have you felt because it is such a temporal elusive thing. Have you felt though at least that it has sort of affected your process at all or just how you're going through your day to day?
It almost feels like mind shift or like my
A
mindset has
paradigm
changed a little.
shift, yeah.
There you go, that's what I'm trying to say, yeah, yeah, it's an interesting feeling. I was very excited that I finally felt that way, and it was just something that like, "Oh, okay," like, I can acknowledge my accomplishments. That's really what it was for me, it's like this very personal sort of realization. Because, like I said, I'm very fortunate where everyone in my life is so supportive. They've always been like, "That's so awesome you're writing. I'm gonna buy your book." And people that I knew in college and stuff bought the book, and it's just so cool, like the support and stuff. But I had never lifted myself up like the way everyone else was. And to
Mm.
have that sort of realization, it kind of finally felt like it was like everything was sort of falling into place, I guess. It's just a great feeling. I don't know.
I think we've kind of dabbled in this new world, Stephen, but feel free to elaborate here. How are you different as a writer today compared to 2 days ago or just overall? But I mean, compared to when you first set out, for a lot of us, myself, yourself included, it started with, the equivalent of literary doodles on a
Yeah.
page as kids and dabbling and dabbling and dabbling and then finally having that moment of this is what I want to do. whether or not I ever go full time, this is what I want to do. So, how are you different today compared to when you first set out?
In the beginning, there's this sort of like the excitement of this new thing that really pushes you forward because you're like, oh, I'm doing this thing I've always thought about, and it's going very well, and people are accepting it. And then for me, anyway, that sort of excitement about a new thing wore off. And so then it was just down to like, okay, now you got to write the thing. Now book two has to come out. Now book three has to come out. Now I'm just much kinder to myself
Mm,
about, like, the whole process of everything from writing to revisions to social media, the like, all the hats we have to wear as, independent authors. It's, like, just much kinder to myself about, like, I don't need to be, like, writing as much every day, or I don't need to be revising as much every day. I can take it at my own pace, and it'll be alright. I don't need to be putting out a million books, in 5 years because my original goal was a book every year, and I think it's so impressive when authors are capable of doing that. That is something that's just, like that's wild. I'm sort of on the same track. My first book came out in 2021, book 2 came out the following year, then I there was a gap year. This past year, I released book 3 and the following novella, so it averages to be a book a year. Um, but yeah, I think it's just yeah, like, just being kinder to myself about the whole process in general.
So you had a lot of time to look at your process within the context of the series, the Amboy series. And I'm always thinking about this because I've got a sequel I'll be working on. Probably not after this current novel's over. I want to let it breathe for a while because I've spent so much time in it. I need a vacation. But I'm sure I'm not the only person who lies awake at night wondering how the hell am I going to write a sequel to this. So when it comes to the sequel, what kinds of things are you considering while you're writing that first book or while you're outlining or just kind of digesting this thing? What kinds of things do you think writers should be considering when planning the next book in a series?
I can only speak for myself and my situation. Book 1 that is published, Along the Perimeter is essentially the first half of the original book 1 that I wanted to put out. So, Along the Perimeter and Haze and Shadow, book 2, I look at that as one book. It's,
Hmm.
the original, like, first book that I wanted to put out, but there's just so much world building and character development that I had to do in book 1 that if I put them together, it would have been this huge tome that I just didn't wanna put out, but book 1 and book 2, they were pretty straightforward getting out, but then when it came to, book 3 and so on, I had to look at what characters did I wanna focus on next because there are Along the Perimeter has 9 POVs, and the following book, it's got, like, 6 or 7, I think, I can't remember off the top of my head, but when you have a cast of characters that large, you have to sort of start, picking up on what readers are focusing on. Because I have it in my head, I'm like, "Okay, this is my main character, and they're gonna be the focus through the whole series," but then when readers start talking to you and they're like, "Oh, I can't wait to see what blah blah does." I'm like, "Oh, shit." Like, okay.
I didn't have a story arc for her.
Yeah. So I think listening to your audience, if you're publishing and there's a little time between each book, listen to how your audience is reacting and see what they're interested in. And if that's where you're sort of headed, lean into that.
Hmm.
In my case, I was also sort of thinking back and looking at the trajectory of certain characters and who ended up being important because right now I'm outlining book 5 while I'm revising book 4 and I had this aha moment the other day and I'm like, "Oh man, if I focus on this character in book 5, it ties all these story points together." And I originally did not intend to do that. They were supposed to be like a it's like secondary character, I guess. But now they're like the main focus of the 5th book. They're like the sort of tying line between all these different stories. Yeah, listen to your audience. Think about where the story's headed as you're writing. For me, I do plot, but I, discover a lot of stuff. And how is that discovery writing affecting the story going forward? Can you see far enough ahead to know, like, okay, this is how I'm going to get to the end. This is how I'm going to get to this point. I'm kind of rambling, but that's essentially,
No, no,
that's
no.
essentially it.
I totally agree with you. And it's an interesting question that PL Stewart, Liz Libby, we've had this kind of conversation, which is how much do you listen to your fans, your audience, and how much do you do simply for your sake? Is there happy coincidences where you both align in terms of priorities? And it's not something I can profess to understanding because I haven't written a sequel, anything direct other than just some character bios for D&D stuff that built off of other ones, which is fine, but doesn't count.
Well, it counts. I'd say it counts.
Yeah, yeah, it was fun. I wrote a couple antagonists. It was a lot of fun. Then I wrote a protag. He was an inquisitor, and I called him Judge Fudge.
Nice.
Yeah, it was fun.
I had my D&D character that actually I ended up putting in the Amboy series. It was originally like Peter Pepperoni, and he was just this like absurd bard, but that turned into Peteroni, and so he's like the sort of entertainer character in the Amboy series. Yeah,
That's kinda like Joshua Scott Edwards. I talked to him when and he by his own admittance, very D&D inspired novel, which is a fun read, and it's always interesting when you're talking to especially fantasy readers or writers to see he's like, "Oh, yeah, that was a paladin I played for, like, 10
yeah,
years, and I had this whole backstory." I figured, "Well, I might as well do something with this."
yeah.
Yeah, that is an interesting question to contemplate is how much of it ultimately I think all the art belongs to you, and this is kind of draconic and I understand that, and I'm always open to people changing my mind. I try to be at least, but I think the art belongs entirely to the artist. Having said that, I think an artist doing what we do also needs to recognize that you are creating something that is going to communicate with people. And if you're doing things out of spite simply because, 100% of your fans want to see this kind of story arc, but you don't like being told what to do, well, then there is a bit of an issue there. And how much are you sticking to your character arc because you don't want to just be a fan servicer? There's an interesting bone of contention there that I can't, again, I can't profess to knowing how you solve it. And you have any thoughts on like what art belongs to the author and how much should we allow readers to dictate?
As far as like ownership goes, it's mine when I'm writing it. It's mine when it's in my head. But once it's published, it's everybody's. It's still mine at that point because it's everyone's. And then like as far as having readers impact your writing, take them into account, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. I think for me, it's like 70-30. Like, if you're writing it with one thing in mind and your readers are expecting something completely different, it's going to clash. And then, they might not finish the series, they might not like the book, but also you can't account for everyone's taste. So,
Hmm.
yeah, as I'm writing and I'm plotting and thinking ahead, it is about like 70-30. Fortunately, I haven't run into any like major like issues as far as what reader expectation goes. Like I mentioned, there was that one character who, in my mind, was sort of like a one off, but people wanted more. So I kind of developed them a little bit more. Yeah, I think write what you want to write. And then as you're continuing on, you got to have your ear to the ground sort of thing and keep that in mind. Don't let it, impact you too much to the point where you're like, well, now I got to change everything. But it's good to keep it in mind, I think. Yeah.
Goody time has arrived. It is upon us. The seminal hour. Goody time with books, habits, whether it's physical, mental, fitness, and health, goals, realistic or otherwise. What kind of advice, Stephen, do you have for aspiring writers?
Be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself. Things aren't always going to go the way you planned, whether it's like, yeah, hitting a word count goal or, you might get a bad review or something, but don't take it all to heart. And if you like writing, it's what you want to do, you're going to power through it all anyway. Like for me, it took me a little bit to get back into it last year just because I was so bogged down. But yeah, it'll always bounce back. Yeah, just be patient and be kind to yourself. That's pretty much it. That's kind of how I look at it because I can be pretty negative, when it comes to like we were saying, like hitting goals and whatnot. So yeah, just remind yourself that, hey, I chose to do this and I want to have fun with it. So let's have fun.
Yeah, this is the job, but it doesn't have to be bad work.
Exactly. Yeah, I recently started an improv class and we
Oh,
meet like
cool.
once a week. Just we've only been to one class so far, but it's already sort of changed the way I think about like creativity and being creative because essentially all improv is like learning how to play and be a kid again. Or the first like activity I guess we did was just shouting our names and just as loud as we can, just shout your name as loud as you can. And then to learn everyone's names, we were shouting everyone else's names in the room. And the instructor was like, "I want you to shout these people's names like they're your teen, and they did something really bad, and you gotta yell at them." So we're just sitting in this room just shouting each other's names and stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really great. After the fact, she was like, "Now why do you think it was so difficult to in the beginning to be so loud?" And we're all like, some people have some ideas but the instructor said this thing where it's like, when you're a kid, you're always told like, "Be quiet, shh, like you're being too loud, you gotta," things like that. And it's sort of ingrained in you that like, okay, don't stand out, don't be loud. And even from that moment, it's sort of you're getting not put in a box, but you're being hampered in some way, I think.
Hmm.
So that's sort of like changing of like the mindset and like just letting yourself do something and have fun with it and be creative and don't worry about being too loud, like do what you want to do and enjoy it kind of thing. I think that's super important. And like I said, I've just went to this class on Wednesday and it's Sunday now, but that one little thing, it's stuck with me.
Did you talk about yes and no but?
Yeah, it was a lot of yes and
Mhm.
yeah.
It's a great I think that's so great because, like, you can use that for so many things. Writing in particular, it has a great I mean, it just lays right atop it perfect, the idea of, like, yes, you succeeded, and the bad guy knows where you are. It's like, no, we didn't succeed, but we found out where the bad guy is. So there's this idea of yes and no but, which is so simple.
Oh yeah.
And I think Matt Stone and Trey Parker talked a lot about it when they talk about how they write their episodes. Is just if you find yourself saying this happened and then this happened and then this happened, it's so linear and
Mhm.
boring and homogenous. Whereas if you're pivoting, yes and no, but and you're just bouncing all over the place. And once you can connect all those dots, you get a great South Park episode, for example. So
Yeah.
that's great, though. I love that you're doing that. You're the first writer I've talked to across the board, period, who's done any improv. That's really cool, man. I love that.
I think, yeah, everyone should give it a try. Even that one class was like, it was so eye-opening, I guess. It was just like, it was very cathartic in a way too, because there was this one exercise that we did where you're like standing inches away from another like classmate and you're looking them dead in the eyes. You
Uh,
can't like arms stay at the side, you're looking at them in the eyes, and you go back and forth and you just describe something. Like, so we started with like a windowsill, and then you're just describing other things in the room and you have to do it as quickly as you can, and it's just like it's really interesting to see where your mind goes and stuff like that. And there's the vulnerability, I guess, of looking in this stranger, I just met these people like,
yeah.
that night. I think everyone should give it a try. It was very empowering, I guess, and just it was very cool. For me, what felt like a big step was finding out about all the awards that there are. Like there's the self-published science fiction award, there's the blog off, the fantasy blog off. Like, even if your book doesn't do well in those, it is such a great way to meet other authors and like connect with other authors and stuff. Like, finally felt that I started finding my people when I started getting into those awards. And even if you're not an author, you can judge, like, if you can apply to judge for some of those awards too, if you are interested. And then, like, that sort of snowballed for me. I'm a part of this Discord, which is like authors connecting to readers sort of thing. Through that, I met a lot of really cool people. So I think as far as like networking and stuff goes, if you can get into one of those awards, like keep an eye out for when they open up the submissions and stuff. Yeah, I would definitely suggest doing that because then it's also getting your book in front of reviewers, and most of these reviewers have blogs where they talk about like the
Hmm.
books that they're reading, even if they're not moving forward in the competition they might do like honorable mentions and stuff. There was this one guy who like one of the first people I didn't know who really loved Along the Perimeter. He really enjoyed it, and I was like, this is so cool. I don't know this guy. And then he bought all the other books. He's read some of them. But I mean, being a judge in the competition, he reached out to me. He's like, my backlog is so big, I can't get to him. Like, that's fine. Like, don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's got to be a really validating feeling.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because like, people they'll buy it, they'll read it, they'll tell you it's good. But when strangers start to pick it up, when you start seeing those like reviews come in, you don't recognize the names and they enjoy it. That is such a cool feeling.
That's fantastic, man. I'm so happy to hear all that, Stephen. It's really encouraging. You and I've just had a great conversation, and it's great to be able to relate with somebody in terms of the pain and punishment we put ourselves through, but how we find the silver lining there as best we can. It's not
Yeah.
always not always there, but the love of Coheed and Cambria and just concept albums in general. Talking about 40K, but all the other good stuff, man. Just it's really cool to see what you're doing. You're enjoying the success. Just 2 days ago, you had a real paradigm shift, it sounds like. And I hope it carries you forward for years to come. And next time you've got something coming out, I think you've got like a Q3 or Q4 release. Is that it?
Yeah, I'm sort of being hesitant about it, but I'm feeling pretty good. I think definitely by the end of the year, it'll be out. It's book four in the Amboy series. I haven't really officially announced titles and stuff like that yet, but I will be at some point. Yeah, once I feel a little more confident in that release date sort of thing.
Let me know when it happens, and we'll have you back on the show. We can just have a sort of informal chat. I'd like to talk some more about the process and just what you're thinking about the direction of the series if you're continuing it and all that stuff. So again, Stephen Healt, thanks so much for sharing your preface today, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's this is really cool. I've never done anything like this before, so it was awesome.
And there you have it. Stephen Healt, great conversation. Fun diving into the STEM stuff. Don't talk about it too often on the show, especially that portion about exoplanets. I know there are quite a few ways they can discover exoplanets, they being really smart people, obviously not myself. So it was cool to dive into that and just look at the simple physics of the thing and how simple can be used to derive larger conclusions. Like I said at the top of the show, the ethics of podcasting. I still have beef with certain larger podcasts. No, it's not born out of envy. It's more a matter of ethics and morals. I try and do my best here to lift people up. I do believe a rising tide lifts all boats. I hope my fellow authors feel the same way, though I know it can be a bit competitive out there. Not everybody gets to be at the top of the mountain. Regardless, discussing these things I do think is important, especially who we have on. I've been lucky enough to have great guests. Hey, I'm a little choosy too. But I'm glad that so far all the guests I've had have been amicable, charitable, and civil. It's nothing like a good faith conversation to restore just a pinch of humanity to this bitter, bitter soul. Super volcanoes, there's one right beneath you, most likely, so, be terrified. It's all good. We're all in this together. Just hope you're right next one when it happens, because my God, if you aren't, well, if you've read Cormac McCarthy's The Road, then you already know. And of course, Warhammer, Thousand Suns, White Scars. Steve, 2 out of 2, by the way, in my trivia section there. Guy was knocking it out of the park. He knows his craft. Anyway, a couple ways you can get in touch with Steven. It's at Stephen Healt on Instagram. Email stephenhealt@gmail.com. He really enjoys getting fan mail, so folks, reach out to him. It really does make a difference. Authors love that stuff. Who wouldn't? And like I mentioned at the top of the show, as did Steven, tentative Q3 release of the next book in the Amboy series. So check that out. And you can check me out at Sam Hale, Hale, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Flitter, Gruber, Xer, whatever we're calling Twitter now. And I'm on Patreon. I've got that $1 tier. There are other ones, but the $1 gets you all the goodies pretty much right off the bat. So if you'd like to contribute more, if you'd just like to join the free membership, Patreon also offers for most every creator on there. It's all good. I appreciate it. I'm just glad I get the opportunity to share my work, my passion, my art with folks, and that you continue to come back and listen to it, and across the world too. It's very encouraging. Anyway, I'm off to record one of the dozens of pods I have lined up, courtesy of some great guests. So until then, may your muse be whispering nothing but inspiration into your ear. And until next time, stay humble, folks.